little bit. Most people are in here, so let's get started since it's a couple of minutes after noon, and others will join. But let's get going. This is going to be a great webinar today, and I'm excited and happy that you're here. I am Amy Maestas, the director of the Collaborative Journalism Resource Hub, and we, as you may or may not know, work around collaborations, journalism collaborations, and a resource for them in many ways. I won't do the big spiel to you today. If you have additional information about what the hub does and offers and can do for you, please reach out to me. I'm happy to set up a time to chat for as long as you want. But thanks for showing up to learn how you can write a great grant proposal for your collaborative or other journalism work. I know that not everybody who may be here today is in a journalism collaborative, so this will be appropriate, but also this is targeted to a lot about how journalism collaboratives, a collective of news organizations and civic and community organizations working together. Pleased to have Sarah Lee from the Fetzer Institute here to lead this webinar today. Sarah is a longtime friend of ours at the Hub and a successful fundraiser. I'll introduce Sarah in a minute, but before I do, I want to share just some quick information. First, we'd love to see you at this year's Collaborative Journalism Summit on May 14th and 15th at Temple University. It's the 10th year of the summit. And we can provide information to register if you're interested. Also, the morning before the summit begins on May 14th, the Hub is hosting, in partnership with the International Women's Media Foundation, a free 4-hour in-person training for how journalists can do their work safely. You'll learn core skills in risk assessment and mitigation, personal security, how to safely cover protests and civil unrest, guidance on personal protection equipment, digital safety, in addition to physical safety, and Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press will also have a legal Know Your Rights session. You don't have to be registered for the summit to attend this free training. If you're in the area that you can get to Philadelphia that morning, you are welcome. Delaney will drop links both to register for the summit and to register for the safety session in the chat. And if you have questions, of course, you can reach out to us on either of those. But I did want to tell you about both of them, and particularly the safety session, again, which is from 8 to noon, and it is free for anybody who wants to learn about doing their job safely. Our next monthly webinar will be held Tuesday, May 26th, again at noon Eastern. We will be sharing the new framework that we at the Hub has created on how journalism collaboratives can track the impact of their work. There are impact tracking frameworks for individual news organizations, but not necessarily collaboratives until now. You can sign up for that on our Eventbrite page soon. Delaney will also drop a link in the chat to the Center for Cooperative Media's Eventbrite page, and then within the next week or two, you'll be able to sign up specifically to learn how your journalism collaborative can track your impact on your communities and audiences. Now let me introduce Sarah. She is the does marketing and audience for the Fetzer Institute and specializes in nonprofit strategy. She has deep expertise in journalism collaboratives and sustainable funding models. She founded and led for a while the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative, securing $150,000 in grants for that collaborative. As a former vice president of marketing and communications at Kalamazoo Community Foundation, she guided strategy for an organization with $600 million in assets and a $14 million annual budget. Sarah is based in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Today's webinar will be recorded, and after the webinar, we will send you a recording of the webinar in addition to Sarah's slides. At the end of Sarah's slide presentation, there will be time for questions. So if you have a question at that point, when she says she'll take them, raise your hand, use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. Sarah will call on you to come off mute and ask your question. And if you don't get to, you can always drop your question in the chat and we can follow up by email. So let's get started. I'm now going to turn it over to Sarah let's get going. Sarah?
Thank you so much, Amy. Let me start with some tech stuff. I need to share my screen, so let's do that really quick and make sure that's running well. Can I get a quick thumbs up that folks can see this? Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, so you've heard a little introduction about me. Some of the personal introduction I'll share about myself, other than my name is Sarah Lee. Have no relation to the bakery, can't bake for the life of me, but I love to cook. Um, I also have a little one, a 17-month-old boy. His name is Henry, and he's the love of my life. So just some personal little tidbits about me, other than my professional background. I've been working with journalism collaboratives and in philanthropy for almost more than I want to say more than 10 years at this point. So working with funders and nonprofits has been kind of my sphere of focus. So today we're going to focus on how journalism collaboratives can write strong grant proposals. And the giant title here, Standing Firm on Three Legs, is kind of the theme that you'll see throughout this whole entire presentation is there are three key areas to focus on. But before we dive into that, I'm just going to give you a quick overview of what are we going to talk about today. There's a few things. So I talked about the framework. The tripod is kind of the framework of the three pillars that we're going to focus on. I'm going to talk a little bit about the current landscape in terms of funding, what's going on. A lot of it you may be already following. Some of this might not be new information. Some of it might be new information for some, but at least I want to level set like context in terms of grant proposals in this day and age. And then third, we'll cover some practical tools that you can use for your grant proposal writing. Yes, a lot of the examples are oriented towards journalism collaboratives, but you can also use some of these tools for just any type of grant proposals you're writing. They're just good practices that I've learned over time working with different nonprofits and different funders and just trying to pull the the peels of the onion, if you will, to get to like what is something that's compelling to a funder as they're reading your grant proposal. So let's talk about the current landscape of funding, right? So some of the challenges we're facing, well, there's plenty of threats to public funding for journalism. As you already know, it's highly covered in the news. A lot of philanthropy has redirected resources to basic needs because a lot of public funding for basic needs have also been pulled or programs that have been discontinued. So philanthropy is in a weird pickle right now where what they used to have available is now being redirected in ways so there's a huge tension that they're experiencing. So some of you may have experienced this already firsthand as you're applying for grants, or if you haven't applied for grants, you might see some of these tensions arise as you're talking to a grant making officer. There's also increased competition. So knowing that what was available to collaboratives or other types of initiatives that isn't necessarily basic needs is now shrinking a little bit because of that competition. And also our current economic uncertainty affects donor priorities. So if there's donors who are involved in some of these application processes or a fund that you're applying to, it may impact how donors perceive what they want to invest in right now. More than likely, they'll pull back funding at this time. Or they'll double down on an area that they really, really feel strongly about. So why this makes strong proposals even more critical right now? Well, funders are being more selective. I think you kind of get the hint earlier already. And having clear impact and sustainability matter more than ever because they want to invest in things that have the ability to be sustainable long term. The beauty of collaboratives, they offer efficiency, and funders are very interested in funding collaboratives. If they were to choose between a local newsroom versus a collaborative, they're more than likely at this time look at a collaborative versus a local nonprofit newsroom directly. Not to say that you shouldn't apply if you are in a newsroom applying. You can still do that. It's just it's what funders have to decide sometimes in tough situations and a very minimized portfolio of dollars available. Also, your proposal has to stand out. So if you're drowning in content that people don't can't follow, can't understand what you're trying to get at, more than likely it gets deprioritized amongst all the other grant proposals that are coming up that are much more clearer in their proposals. So let's do a little quick poll here, and if Delaney can help us with this. I just want to know in the room, where are you in your grant journey? Uh, there's a couple of options here. Once the poll is turned on, just please click on which one is relevant to you. Have you Never written a grant proposal? Have you written a grant proposal, like 1 to 3 proposals? Have you written more than 4? Or are you in a support role where you have never written it directly, but you are like an editor or maybe a reviewer, so a support role? So feel free to click on that poll. It just got activated. And then we'll see who's in the room and where you are on your grant journey. And let us know if you don't see the poll for some reason.
I was gonna say I see them coming in, but always give a shout.
All right, and once those poll entries have come in, Delaney, would you mind sharing the results? I don't think I could see it from my end, but if you could share it out loud, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're at about 85% participation, which I mean I think is pretty good. um, I think that's statistically significant. Pretty sure if I close out here, we'll be able to see. And
Ooh, we got some seasoned folks in the group here.
yeah.
That's exciting. That's awesome. So we got about 41% of folks who participated in this poll who have written 4+ proposals. That's awesome. Maybe you can share some insights too. There's always more to learn. What I'm sharing with y'all today is probably like the broad overview of everything that I've experienced that make a group proposal, but if you've got more things you want to share, feel free to share it as well. So that's great. No, thank you so much for sharing and participating in this poll. It gives me a good idea of who's in the room and what kind of support you might need. All right, let's move on to the next section here. So let's talk about this tripod metaphor that we just talked about earlier. Your proposal needs 3 legs to stand on. So think of your grant proposal like a camera tripod. A little cute picture on the right here. If you don't have one or the other, your proposal will tend to fall flat. So that's kind of like what I'm trying to say with this metaphor here. So let's talk about what those 3 areas are. The 3 legs. The first one is about strategic alignment. Your project has to connect directly with what the funder cares about. And this is usually the first one that everybody misses most of the time. It's not limited to journalism collaboratives. Every nonprofit I've ever worked with, where we are applying for a grant, whether it's for arts and entertainment or for education or early childhood education, or even for environmental initiatives, they tend to forget that some funders don't fund these areas. Some funders specialize in certain priorities, and some are just more broad-based, meaning they may consider, but historically they've never funded something, so they wouldn't likely fund it. So this is one of those key legs that we'll go deeper into and some of the practical tools to dig into. How do we find that strategic alignment? The second one is a compelling evidence. So this is the leg 2 of the tripod. Making sure you have a data-driven storytelling with very clear impact in your proposal. So data is still very important in terms of tracking measures. And I have a couple of examples later on in the tool section of what that looks like and how to compile those evidences that you can share as part of your proposal. The third one is and this is once again focus on the collaborative. So if you're working with collaboratives, if it's not journalism, let's say it's a different collaborative, because here in Kalamazoo, we've worked with several different collaboratives for focus on early childhood and violence prevention. So there's different cohorts that are focused on different things. So for a funder, what they're looking for is your collaborative credible? Does it actually work? So you need to show evidence that the partnership works and how are resources being used wisely. So this is something that most funders, if they don't have a relationship with you yet and you're establishing a new one, they're probably going to be curious about how this is working. So once again, like a tripod, if one of these is weak or missing, the whole proposal fails. I know it sounds like a pass fail, but it just doesn't strengthen your proposal overall. So the first one talked about strategic alignment, trying to dig deeper into what does this mean. Doing research. That's half of your grant proposal process is research, researching the funder thoroughly. So if there is a particular funder that you're looking at that you have found through a database or referral, or that you were Googling and you found this person has been funding journalism initiatives or a focus area that you've been focused on, whether it's mental health, environment. Um, so researching past grants and annual reports are a great way to do that type of research. And when you go through each one of them, make sure you find out the guidelines for their funding. Most of them are listed on their website, which is great. But if not, feel free to reach out to them and ask, because sometimes not all funders are the same. Some are a little bit more closed doors, especially if they're private foundations or private listed trusts. Like we'll go into this a little bit more too. There's a lot of different national foundations that aren't necessarily have a public facing website. So I'll show you some resources on how to find those as well. And then also show the collaborative advantage as you're going through the strategic alignment. What can you accomplish together that solo outlets cannot do? So in short, what does this mean? Your proposal speaks directly to what the funder values, using their language and addressing their specific goals. I know this sounds really straightforward, so if this resonates with you, that's great. That means you know what it takes to start with the grant proposal. The second one is compelling evidence. So establishing your problem. If your collaborative is working on, or if you're writing a grant proposal that's addressing a particular problem, make sure data is included. So in this case, if you're talking about supporting capacity for journalism, news desert information data, there's tons of it available. If you have it more localized to your area, even better. About underreported issues, audience needs. If you've done a lot of community surveys to understand what is needed to be covered more, use those numbers. Those numbers are very compelling. It helps provide evidence that you're not just coming up with this on your own, like the 6 or 12 of you in the room. We're representing a population that the funders are serving. Show your approach is sound. You know, whether you've had past success or any evidence of what you've done in the past. If you're brand new, probably that's the challenge, but maybe you can do some projects that help do some testing to show proof of like how your approach as a collaborative works. And then define measurable outcomes. So if you have stories published, audience reach numbers, community impact, be specific with that kind of data. So this is kind of like your compelling evidence that would convince why a funder should even consider funding you. What this means, you prove there's a real problem and your approach will work and you can measure success. I think there's a lot of challenges with like many nonprofits. And once again, this is not limited to collaboratives only, but sometimes measuring success is a challenge if you feel like there's a qualitative component to it. But there's a few practical tools I'll share in a little bit here about how you can measure success or how you demonstrate measurements in your proposals. So we'll get there in a little bit here. All right, the third one, collaborative credibility. So showing your governance structure, how decisions are made, how do you resolve conflicts, and how you share credit is one of those different ways to show credibility of the collaborative, how it functions. If and wherever possible, this is always optional. It's not a requirement for a grant proposal, but if you put it as part of your packet of what you're submitting, letters to show specific contributions from each member. It really helps because it shows that there's stake in the work itself. It's not just one person writing for the whole. It's showing that everybody is playing a part in showing how important this work is, and they were committed to addressing the problem in the way that they can. And also building a transparent budget. So how it's distributed, how are the costs justified, and just how the expenses are coordinated. And I have a practical tool about how to establish your budget spreadsheet a little bit in a little bit too. So we'll have a lot of tools to go over in a little bit here. So what this means, you demonstrate that partners work well together, make decisions effectively, and will use funds responsibly. It's all key due diligence pieces, but at the end of the day, it's about proving a method, in this case, the collaborative as a method to addressing problems in your community. All right, so I talked a lot about tons of practical tools as it relates to each leg of the tripod. And so in each practical tool, you'll see it aligned to a specific leg of the tripod. You'll see the connection, which one's going to strategic alignment, which one's evidence, and which one's about collaborative partnership pieces. And a lot of these tools, you can use it today. And like Amy mentioned earlier, a copy of this deck will be available and sent to those who signed up for this particular workshop. So feel free to go back over these again. If you forget anything today, feel free to screenshot if you're like really excited about using something today. Screenshot, photograph, however you like to capture information and notes, feel free to do so. All right, so let's dig into tool number one, the funder alignment matrix. It sounds so fancy. That's nothing to do with Neo, if anyone knows the movie reference, but really it's just building a spreadsheet, mapping your projects to the priorities of the funder. And this relates to leg number one, which is the alignment with the funder. So here's a really quick tool that I've used in the past for tracking nonprofit grants that I helped write for an arts organization in town. So we were looking at these different columns: funder priority, alignment, their language, and how we would use it in what section. So the examples I provided here are more aligned to journalism collaboratives. So for example, if the funder priority is strengthen local news, well, our alignment as a collaborative would be we have 5 outlets reaching rural areas. That's great. And the language they use are like news deserts. So when we talk about it in the problem statement for submitting a grant proposal, these are the keywords we have to use in that space so it clicks quicker for a funder as they're reading through your proposal. Another example is there are some funders who are truly interested in funding collaborative models. So regardless of whether it's journalism or something else, they are just like they think collaborative is the solution on how to address problems. So maybe an alignment would be, hey, we have resource sharing that saves 40%. This is cool. We can demonstrate this. And their language is sustainable partnership. So in the method section in a grant proposal, you can share how you do resource sharing and how the collaborative functions. So basically, this is just like a way of setting up a template that helps you align uh, what the funder is looking for and how it aligns with the work that you already do. And this ensures every paragraph speaks to what they care about, they as in the funder. Moving on to tool number two, the so what test. Get to the real impact. So this is related to the evidence portion. And you can apply this to every claim in your proposal. So here's an example of not so great um, claim in a proposal that I've read in before. It says, we'll produce 10 investigative stories. So what? Stories will expose housing discrimination. Okay. So what? This will inform policy changes. Okay. So what? From a funder's perspective, it's like, why should I care about this? I can also relate this to journalism. When you write a story, why would the audience care about what you have to write? So in this case, you're shifting the audience from the broader audience to funders. And in this case, the last so what here is, improving housing access for 50,000 residents in underserved communities. You see, like that kind of so what response in terms of the claim that you're trying to do is very different from the initial one that was written. So this is a very simple framing. It's not earth-shattering, but it is something that can help strengthen whatever claims that you're trying to make in your proposal or initiative that you're trying to accomplish, or activity in this case. Um, how is it really going to impact the community that you're serving? So keep asking, so what, until you reach the real world impact that matters to funders. So that's something to keep in mind. Tool number three, a one-page logic model. I am big on logic. Logic meaning like, does this make sense? It's not fancy logic like math or anything. It's just like, how does this all align? So this is one of the words that funders use a lot is theory of change. This is a type of theory of change. So this is a visualization. Wherever you can use visuals in your grant proposal, include it. Include it as an attachment, as a PDF. A simple visual that clarifies your approach is really helpful. So this is an example of a logic model that we've used at the community foundation that I used to work at, where we outline problem, activities, outputs, outcomes, and impact. So this is a logic model that you can use if you like to use it. You can use, there are tons of different models of theory of changes out there, but this is one that I like the most because it's about, does this make sense? So in this case, I use an example of housing issues. How the problem is housing issues are underreported. Activities, well, this will include collaborative investigative series. The output will be 10 stories across 5 outlets. Outcomes, policy hearings help. The impact, better housing access. And this keeps it very simple and straightforward. So for a funder who's trying to understand how your collaborative functions and how your work is going to impact community ultimately, this maps it out for them, simple in the logic, and they are going to be curious to read. So tell me more. This is what you want to get them to get to. So tell me more. So just know this kind of visual, it's available online for free. You know, you can use Canva. In fact, my presentation today is created on Canva. There's a lot of free templates like this available, even on PowerPoint, to include this visual in your proposal. So do consider creating visuals as part of your grant proposals. Tool number 4. I know this should have come first, but I wanted to get into some of the juicy tools first. But executive summary. This is kind of like your guidance for your whole entire proposal before you even write the proposal. And some of you might have already done this practice many times. So kudos to those who have done this, and those who haven't. This is something that will help guide your focus on a grant proposal. Because imagine every time you dive into a grant proposal that you have to write, you feel like towards the end, you're like, I'm done, I'm spent, I don't even know what I'm writing anymore. So writing this executive summary, it's about 250 words. Kind of think of like if you're doing a research paper, it's the abstract at the beginning. If you can't make it compelling in 250 words, the 20-page version of your grant proposal won't be either. So what you include in this executive summary, so just to help you stay focused, but also it can be your talking points down the road if you're talking to a funder directly. It should include the problem with data, which we've already talked about, your solution, what makes it unique. So in this case, if your collaborative is coming in to help elevate a particular issue and bring to light how this will help impact certain things, who you are, the collaborative credentials. So like, have you done this work before? Have you worked on different things together? Show some proof. Expected impact, measurable outcomes, and also the amount requested. So if you put this in 250 words, um, that will be a great way to just frame it and keep your mind focused on as you're writing the grant proposal. And one of the ways I like to kind of describe it is write it like you're explaining to a very smart friend over coffee and then polish it. So if your smart friend asks you questions, it's like, all right, I gotta fix this a little bit. I need to like use less jargon maybe, or I need to like rephrase this in a way that makes more sense. So that's one of the tools I would recommend is executive summary. Write that out to help you kind of guide your full proposal. Tool number 5, partner letters. We talked about this earlier on leg 3. So proving the collaborative is real. Have each partner organization write one letter page. It includes, there's 4 things that I usually like to recommend when we talk about any kind of partner letters is the time that's being contributed by those partners, whether they have staff dedicated to it, the distribution channels, the audience reach, any specialized expertise. So, for example, like at the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative, shout out. I see 2 of you represented here today in the audience. And what for an example of specialized expertise is someone does Spanish translation. That's Nueva Opinión. They do a lot of our Spanish reporting and translation as well. So things like that are really helpful to help provide context of the contribution, but also like how it's meaningful to the community. Here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, for example, the Spanish speaking population is one of the fastest growing and continues to be so, especially after the recent last census data. So that tells us there's a great need. We need to continue making sure that any information that's being distributed publicly should also be translated to Spanish. And all of this demonstrates like that shared commitment, having clear roles, the existing relationships that exist, but also puts into frame the realistic planning around it. So more than often, these partner letters, like I said earlier, it's not a requirement, but they are often like attachments or appendices that you can upload as a PDF. But they do significantly strengthen credibility. And believe it or not, funders do look at these letters. All right, moving on to tool number 6. Detailed budget. So I talked a little bit about how to build your spreadsheet or a budget piece. In this way, this is about building a detailed worksheet first for yourself and then creating a clean summary version. The clean summary version is what goes to the funder ultimately. And if you've done this before, excellent. If you haven't, these are just great frameworks to help you like understand how to build your budget in a way that illustrates not only the work but also puts it in the context of what's the need within, so the funder can understand what are we funding exactly. So a detailed worksheet example is writing out, let's say you want to hire 2 reporters. Okay, we gotta write down the reporter salary. So we're talking about 2 reporters, 20 hours a week, 26 weeks. That's the time frame for this particular project. And we're thinking $50 an hour. So that takes us to about $52,000. So in the budget summary proposal, you take that number, the math that you just done, and write it as personnel, 2 reporters, zero point 0.5 FTE, FTE is full-time equivalent, and then it's $52,000. So if you need to write it out this way, the detailed budget, it's really helpful not only for you, but for down the road when there's follow-up questions. The funder can understand what you're looking for in those specific budget line items. I don't know how often folks get questions about the budget, but I feel like that's always the number one place that funders go to, in addition to the narrative, where they have a lot of questions. So, key thing for collaboratives, make sure you show fair distribution across partners and include any coordination costs, like project manager time, meetings, shared tools. All of those things are important to be included because they know it's a collaborative. So, collaborative needs a infrastructure to function. What are those administrative collaborative costs? So being transparent about those is really important. Tool number 7, gather proof points. This is one of my favorite things to do. It was a library of content that I ended up building for, it's like a grant making dossier, grant writing dossier. So compiling your evidence library. So this is in regards to leg number 2 again, creating a document with everything you might need to reference. So this is 4 different columns, and you can do this in a Google document and create different like bookmarks for this section. So every time when you write a grant proposal in the future, you don't have to keep going like searching through emails, asking people like, hey, did we do this? How do we track this? Or other types of like data that might be spread up all over the place. You can combine them onto a central location. Like for example, I just mentioned a Google Doc with different like reference sections or bookmarks. These are the 4 areas that will be really good to make sure you gather proof points. Data metrics, we already talked a lot about this, and I know that the Hub has tons of different frameworks and tools for this piece. Credentials, so like any awards and recognition that have been awarded to members because of the pieces they work together on. This is something I notice people don't track enough of. You want an award, let's like celebrate this, but also make sure you bring it back to the funder to say, hey, the work that we produce is award winning and it's recognized and it's being amplified. Story examples, if you had successful investigations or impact stories or collaborative work samples, once again, awards won for those story examples. Those are great proof points to add to your overall proposal. And last but not least, support, which ties back to earlier about community partner letters. This is earlier I talked about collaborative partner letters. Now there's community partner letters. If you can ever get community partners who have worked with your collaborative, for example, like we have an advisory council with the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative, and we inquired in the advisory council, could you share some of your feedback about your experience with the collaborative so far? And they had been with us for almost a year at that point. It's the Equitable Community Development Advisory Council. And shout out to Melinda, who's in the room, for leading that group. Uh, and 2 people stepped up to give like a really nice testimonial about how it's been great working with us. But not only just it's great, it's like we're actually showing proof in terms of making sure we're elevating underrepresented voices. And also the coverage is demonstrating that proof as well. So that kind of testimonial and support letters are really helpful in gathering proof points. And if you can get those documented as you're going through things, and put them into this dossier, if you will, or Google document, helps you in the long run as you're applying for future grant proposals. Those are the types of things that people, and especially funders, love to see. And if it's someone they've worked with before in the community space, because nonprofits and folks in philanthropy, especially within the community area, they know each other really well. So if they know somebody else is also supportive of the collaborative work, that helps at credibility and just like overall community support for the work that you're doing. Last tidbit here is having this ready makes writing 10 times faster. I mean, the various grants I've written for different nonprofits, this was my go-to, like this was my go-to guide for everything. So it helped pull references quickly for me. Anyway, hopefully this is a helpful tool to you. And if you haven't created one, definitely consider creating one. And you can start simple. You don't have to be overly elaborate, but something worthwhile pulling together so it helps you in your process. Tool number 8, the headlines method. If you're in journalism, headlines matter in this case. So headlines and grant proposals help you stay focused and prevent rambling. But focus is also not only for you, it's also for the funder so they can track along what you're talking about. So before writing each section, one of the things, an exercise that I've done with different board members when we're trying to write grant proposals or just trying to educate them about how to write better grant proposals, is write one sentence takeaway that you want people to remember. And people in this case are funders. What do you want those grant reviewers to remember? So without the headlines, um, you know, without the headlines, you start writing drift and tangents, etc., etc. But with a headline, in this case, I give you an example. Problem section headline. 3 counties have lost all local news coverage, leaving 85,000 residents uninformed about local government. Now write 2 to 3 paragraphs supporting that claim. So this is kind of like helping you with the 3 different legs. One is the strategic alignment, the evidence piece, and the support of the collaborative function of how that all comes together. So headlines, where possible, you can include them in your grant proposal. Make sure they're bolded and they're clearly written out. Okay. Oh, so those are the top 8 practical tools for grant proposals. Here is just more like a writing tips for all levels. Immediate improvements to your proposals. Lead with conclusions. I know that sounds really strange for some folks, and some folks might be like, yeah, that makes sense. Start every paragraph with the takeaway, then show evidence of how that works. Don't make them hunt for your point, is basically what I'm trying to say. Use concrete numbers wherever possible. Don't say things like significant reach. That sounds like jargony, but also kind of like doesn't tell me your impact. But if you know the numbers, use the numbers as best as possible. So like reach 2.3 million people across 3 counties. That's a significant number. Kill any jargon. In journalism, we always do that where possible. We try to make sure we're writing it at a level that's accessible to all reading levels. But if you're writing this and you're not in journalism necessarily, just keep in mind of any types of jargon that you might be using. If you must use technical terms, define them. And then last but not least, include story examples. I think I already mentioned this before, but any brief case studies to help you make things more concrete and memorable is really helpful. Okay, a little bit more focus on just collaboratives. What makes your proposal different? So just making sure you address some of these collaborative specific questions. And I might have touched on a few of these earlier, but I just want to bring this all together in this slide here is decision making, share how editorial decisions are made, who has the final say, conflict resolution, what happens when partners disagree, credit imbalance, how is attribution handled, resource equity, is funding distributed fairly and how, and sustainability, what happens after the grant ends. Because a lot of funders want to know that your collaborative is built to last, not just form for just this grant. Because collaborative work is meant to help sustain a long-term strategy or a long-term solution. So if it's just for a one-time thing, there's a sense of loss of an investment that isn't necessarily moving the needle or making a difference in the community. Okay, here's some extra tools. So earlier was about tools about writing the proposals. This is more about finding the right funders. And if you already have access to these things, wonderful. You just have to maximize using how you use it. And that is a whole entire course in itself. But for those who are just starting out or haven't used these tools, get access to these databases if you can. Subscriptions can be affordable, can be expensive. It depends on what your budget's available. But these are the three I would recommend. Candid Foundation Directory, they have the gold standard. It's pretty comprehensive. Candid's Guide Star, it's free basic info, includes 990s. 990s is pretty much where you're going to get a lot of great information about what's being funded. And then Grant Station, it's a little bit more affordable, good for regional funders. But other resources, I would say it's like you're familiar with Press Forward. There's also Press Forward Locals. Find one in your area who's on the list, and you can see who are those funders who are involved. Those could be folks that you can research directly. And then Chronicle of Philanthropy. Just because I used to work there, they're amazing people. I always give them a shout out. They have lots of great resources. But just to let you know, if you didn't know this, if you are a subscriber, a paid subscriber of Chronicle of Philanthropy, and just as an FYI, as a premium subscriber for $38.50 per month, it includes a free subscription to Grant Station, which is a $200 value. So if you, let's say you wanted to just like use this for a month, uh, consider a paid membership with Chronicle of Philanthropy, and you get access to Grant Station, and you can organize all of your different grant research, funder research through that particular resource. Other research tips that I would recommend: connect with your local community foundation. Believe it or not, every single state in the United States has a community foundation, whether it's representing the whole state or a particular township or county. Every single area has a community foundation of some sort. And they're in service to the community. If you are unable to secure a funding, or if it's not in alignment, they can always recommend you to other funders in town, because that's their job. Their job is to understand the community needs, but also understand the funding landscape so that they can find collaboration where possible. There's also family and private foundations that might be housed as a trust, such as Wells Fargo Trust is one of the more nationally known ones, or a place-based financial trust. So, for example, here in Kalamazoo, Michigan, we have a organization called Greenleaf Trust. They hold a lot of different like family and private foundations, which sometimes don't have websites. So, contacting them and inquiring, or if you can talk to someone at the community foundation to help provide a friendly referral or introduction, that also really helps. And then the last research tip is building relationships. I know this sounds like a lot of work, and it does, but it pays off once you have all of these pieces connected together. But those relationships that you have as you contact folks at the foundation, take them out to coffee, tea, lunch, whatever you feel most comfortable doing. Building those relationships help you with not only like getting the information you need to have for your grant proposal, but also maybe a referral to other people who might be considering funding your work as well. Okay, the common pitfalls, I just have to highlight this, and you probably already know a lot of this, is this is based on what I've learned from other people's mistakes, my own mistakes as well. So I'm not without flaw. But as always, don't ignore guidelines from the funder. That's an automatic rejection. Don't make vague claims. We already talked about this. Don't bury your main point, and always submit your proposal, uh, proofreading it first before sending it out. Don't forget to show collaborative advantage, and don't pad the budget or lowball costs. Be as realistic, include everything that will take to do something, but don't put any vague kind of like, "Ooh, I think it's gonna take us another $10,000 to do this." Like, what's the 10,000 going to? So don't be too vague in that way. But do have multiple people review where possible. Use exact language that the funder is using. Make it scannable. So those headlines that we just talked about are really helpful. Include visuals where possible, like the logic model or even a timeline. Submit well before the deadlines. I know this is not necessarily realistic for some folks because we are short on capacity overall in our lives, but where possible, if you can submit it well before the deadline, please do so. It gets noticed. And then build relationships with program officers. So like I mentioned earlier, building relationships really helps you go a long way because it's about fostering a connection about what we're trying to accomplish together for our community. So key takeaways. Let's say you forget every single thing I talked about today. And here are the three things I would probably want you to remember. The proposal, the tripod, those three areas: strategic alignment, compelling evidence, collaborative credibility. If you have all those three things in your grant proposal, you're solid. start using some of those tools that we talked about today, like the funder matrix. That's a good spreadsheet to start tracking funder alignment. The so what test, that's also a very simple test. The logic model visual, the headlines method. I love the headlines method. It's so much easier to go through a proposal when you can see the headlines and then go deeper in the areas that you want to read more. And those will immediately strengthen your writing. A third key takeaway, collaboratives have a unique advantage, and each collaborative is different. I won't say all collaboratives are the same because they're different people, different compositions, different organizations. But the key thing to note is about efficiency and reach. When you come together, you are able to do things more efficiently. Hopefully, you figure that out, and the reach is also different. So show how that partnership enables what people who do things by themselves cannot achieve. So that's very important to make sure you include in your grant proposal. All right, we're at Q&A and we are at 12:48, which is a lot sooner than I expected. As Amy mentioned earlier, if you have questions, feel free to drop it in the chat, or you can raise your hand in the Zoom function here. And we can go from there. I know I gave you a lot of information, so if you're taking time to digest, take your time. And I see Summer. Summer, you've got a question for me.
Yeah. Thank you so much for holding this. This is great. I'm sorry I was a bit late, but I'm wondering, are you a 501c3 or do you have a fiscal sponsor to do that?
You, are you talking about the journalism collaborative that I'm a part of?
Right.
Yeah, they're fiscally sponsored through an organization called Public Media Network.
Public Media Network. Got it.
Yeah.
And then can you, I guess, talk about finding aligned fiscal sponsorship?
That is a whole entire session in itself, but I can speak to kind of like broad strokes on this. Like finding fiscal sponsors um, is, I want to say, a lot easier than people expect. It's just a matter of whether people want to undertake it or not. Finding organizations where the mission aligns with the work that you're doing is always a great way to identify potential fiscal sponsors because fiscal sponsorship varies by organization. It could be we just do all your administrative and financial tasks, which means if you receive a grant, we'll take care of like processing it and making sure that it is being received properly and documented so that you don't get in trouble with the IRS. So you can have something like that, and then you can have something all the way to the other end, which is like, I forgot what the organization called. I think it was Local Media Association, if I'm not mistaken. They offer like fiscal sponsorship as well, and they have that spectrum where they do the minimum of financial tasks, but they also offer the other side, which is like fundraising might be included as part of fiscal sponsorship. Those kinds of opportunities of fiscal sponsorship with fundraising components are very rare. So just keep that in mind that most of fiscal sponsorships are often the financial and administrative. But in terms of looking for it, I would say start with looking at their mission alignment with what you're doing. And that helps you kind of have that conversation. A lot of community foundations do offer fiscal sponsorships too. It's just a matter of how many they're willing to undertake. There's like 4 different quadrants to a community foundation's portfolio. Fiscal sponsorship is one of them. Donor advice funds is another one. Grant making is another, and an initiative. So they have like a 4 quadrant kind of focus to their work. Some organizations, some community foundations don't do fiscal sponsorship because it's just too much work for them, or maybe it just doesn't align in their mission currently. But there's several, like I think there's a couple down in Florida, for example, that have done what they do fiscal sponsorship as their focus. Hopefully that's helpful as a kind of broad stroke. All right, Jillian, I see your hand up.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
Good.
So, I'm actually a freelance writer. Most of my career has been in journalism. So, I was wondering, how would you suggest somebody who doesn't have that much grant writing experience, how would you suggest that we like pitch ourselves to different organizations? Or are there any like outside resources that we can learn from as well to try to get that experience and try to build like a resume and a portfolio?
For freelance writing or for grant writing
For grant
specifically?
writing, but coming from like
Yeah.
somebody who has more of a freelance journalism background.
Yeah. You know, that's an interesting question because I kind of grew into grant writing as well. There's no course or school that you can go to that says, I got this certificate, now I can do grant writing. There's no such thing, honestly. I mean, there might be, but nobody's going to look at that certificate and say, okay, you can do grant writing. But my best advice is working with nonprofit boards and their grant proposals will give you that experience to start, even if it's starting with reviewing. And then if you want to start helping writing sections, that's a great way to grow because one, you're supporting a nonprofit that you care about and you're passionate about. They all have to write grants. Especially the nonprofits that are smaller in capacity, like the one person shop executive director nonprofits that have a board of, I don't know, 12 to 14 people and everyone takes different parts. Sharing your interests of wanting to write or get some experience writing grants would be a great way to get involved, and you can take sections of a proposal and help them write. That would be one of the best ways I would recommend to get more experience to build out your portfolio, and you can add that to your portfolio to say, I've supported this particular organization in writing their proposal. And over time, you can say, maybe can I take lead on this particular proposal and write that out for them too. So that would be one way I would recommend, or at least that's one way I've done in the past to help grow that experience and build that portfolio. Hope that answers your question, Dylan.
You did, thank you.
Yeah. Let me take a look at the chat and see if I missed anything else. Oh, thank you, Shernay, about Pointer having a free grant writing course. Absolutely.
Sarah,
Ava's, yeah.
Eva shared asked a question about resources to talk about how to talk about impact.
All right. So the question in the chat here is, I find the outcomes impacts of our explainer journalism hard to articulate. Do you have any resources on how to talk about impact? So there's a lot of different ways to talk about impact, but one of the biggest challenges I would say would be how do you tie it to community, right? So some of the ways that I've addressed some of this issue is one, use social media to kind of survey folks in the community if you have a social media presence. If not, if you're collaborative, if you're working in a collaborative, if they're willing to do like an informal survey to gather data and impact on what you have produced to track some of the informal surveying and data. I know that doesn't sound like a very easy way, but um, that's one way of talking about impact is to gather from the community the impact of the pieces that you have produced and talking to people directly to if there's someone who has benefited from this or if not benefited was interviewed and saw impact from it. So for example, like in the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative, they were doing a mental health reporting project a few years ago. And when we interviewed some of the therapists that we interviewed previously, BIPOC therapists, they said their specific practice grew in terms of like patient signups or new patient incoming because they saw this article. And so those are really great stories to capture as illustrations of impact. I hope that's addressing your answer, but I see like other folks responding as well. Impact Tracker by Impact Architects, that's something Rashid just shared. Um, those are really cool tools. See, like I said, you got 41% people who have written more than 4+ proposals. You've learned something. So I'm not the only smart person in the room. There's tons of smart people in this room who can share a lot of tidbits as well. So thank you, folks, for sharing that in the chat. I really appreciate it. Other questions? And Amy, let me know if I missed any question because there's a lot of chatter going on, so I might have missed
I
something. So
don't
let me
think
know if there's
I don't
anything.
think you missed any question. Oh, yes. Alejandro asked what the funders focus for Hispanic media, if you know.
That's a good question. I don't represent all funders, so just to put that as a caveat. But I guess what I've noticed from funders when they perceive Hispanic media is how it represents their community. So if there's a need in the community, so when we were talking about the logic model, for example, the problem statement, if you know there is a particular problem that needs to be addressed within the community that the Hispanic media can address directly, for example, like I talked about in Kalamazoo, Michigan, we're the fastest growing Spanish speaking population here. And we don't have enough resources and information translated into Spanish. So Nueva Opinion is a great example of translating information into Spanish that is accessible and it can reach more people through their distribution, both online and also through their newspaper. So that's an example. I don't want to limit it to just translation because Hispanic media can do a lot. In fact, any ethnic media can do a lot more for its community. It's a matter of just clarifying what it is that you're trying to support within your community and then making it clear for the funder to understand how they can play a role in helping that become a reality.
Looks like you captured all those in the chat. If nobody has any others, we can wrap this up. Sarah, if you have other thoughts. Sarah just shared her contact information, and I will include that in a follow-up email that I will send to everybody who registered for the webinar. It will include Sarah's slides from today. It will include a recording of this webinar, her contact information. I will also remind you that we will be having next month a webinar. Our next webinar will be how collaboratives can track the impact that they're having on their audiences and communities that is targeted toward journalism collaboratives. And a collaborative can be one or two partner sharing. It could be two people collaborating. It could be multiple, 20 plus, whatever. But it will be directed, it'll be translatable to individual news organizations. I think there are, as I said, tracking frameworks out there for individual news organizations. The framework we've created, our colleague Carrie Porter has put together, is for collaboratives, specifically when you have multiple organizations working together. That will be next month at noon Eastern on Tuesday, May 26th. So you can sign up for that. Of course, these are free. And we have these free monthly webinars, generally the last Tuesday of every month. You can sign up for our newsletter to find out about each month's topic. Thank you, Sarah. This is a lot of actionable items and tools to take away. And thank you, everybody, for coming today. We appreciate it. Have a good day.